Hello everybody, hope you're doing well. Welcome back to the channel Anglo Election Insights, where we are previewing the upcoming Australian federal election, and today's video is the final part of my series on Victoria, this time focusing on the non-metropolitan seats. So having a look over the electoral history of these seats, there's no consistent or clear trend. There are multiple things happening over different timescales in different parts of the state, and we need to sort of go through and break that down in a bit more detail. So the first thing that jumps out at me here is the consolidation of the Labor vote across Victoria's three main regional centres of Geelong, Ballarat and Bendigo. You can see Corangamite has gone from a fairly comfortable Liberal seat when it was more of a rural seat, but as its boundaries have changed and its demographics have changed along with it, that's pushed it firmly into Labor's column. And then here, Ballarat and Bendigo in the Howard years were marginal Labor seats, but now they're very safe Liberal seats. We can probably put that down to the changing economies of these regional cities. They're no longer manufacturing hubs or relying on any sort of real primary industry, but instead it's public service or public sector jobs that have come in, and they're very much based around the services industry as well, which brings in a demographic that's much more favourable to Labor. And Melbourne's housing market, pricing out younger families, has forced a lot of that demographic to move to some of these areas as well, which has helped. And you can see that has somewhat played out in some of the more rural seats as well. Wannon is a good example, with the city of Warrnambool and its university. Nichols is a good example as it moves further and further away from the Murray and creeps into Melbourne's outer north. You can even see it to some extent in Indi, flipping to the independent, with the larger or the smaller cities of Wangaratta and Wodonga. But then where primary industry still dominates the electorate, such as agriculture in Mallee or in Gippsland, where you've got logging and that sort of thing, the national brands are still really strong. But then even in the sort of more peri-urban seats, we have diverging trends. Latrobe was coming towards the Labor Party, but now it's becoming more of a reliable Liberal seat as its population around the growth region of Pakenham is trending towards the Liberals. A similar story in McEwen. Labor managed to grab it in those sort of Gillard-Rudd years, but now as it moves closer and closer to the northern fringe of Melbourne and takes in more of Whittlesea and that sort of area, it too is trending towards the Liberal Party. But the opposite is happening in Casey, which is taking in more of Melbourne's northeast, but it's moving steadily away from the Liberal Party and becoming very marginal. And just looking at this pictorially, you can see Labor's strengthening grip on the central regional centres. You can see in electorates like Wannon, Nichols and Indi, the coalition becoming weaker and weaker over time, but then their position in strengthening in Mallee and Gippsland, and also in this sort of southeastern part of the state here. So we'll jump right into the key seats, and the first one is Wannon, which is actually my home electorate. It's a large electorate that stretches all the way from the Surf Coast and Geelong's western edge all the way to the state border. It includes the city of Warrnambool, as well as smaller cities like Portland, Colac, Ararat. So you have these large areas of strong Liberal vote, mostly around sort of Colac and just in all the little towns and agricultural districts. But then you have that sort of spillover from Geelong at the eastern edge of the electorate that's a lot more friendly to Labor. And then you have more traditional working class Labor strongholds such as Portland and Ararat. And then the city of Warrnambool, which is trending more towards the left as well. But the main challenge isn't coming from Labor, it's coming from Alex Dyson, who's making his third run as an independent, supported by the Voices for Wannon group, and particularly supported by Climate 200 this time. In fact, he's received quite a lot of money, and he's setting up a much bigger campaign than he has done in previous years. The feature that really stood out to me in this seat in 2022 was the weak preference flow. And I think that might change this time round, particularly as Alex Dyson's image and brand becomes a bit more well known across the electorate. I think not only does will he take probably more of the Labor and Green vote, but also some of the more kind of liberal friendly minor parties or liberal voters themselves will become more aware of who he is, and that might change the way preferences are distributed at the end. But yeah, a really interesting electorate, and definitely a big challenge for the Liberals to hold it, but also a really big challenge for Dyson to win over some of this stagnant Liberal vote. It is an older electorate. They're a little bit more set in the ways. He's a sort of young punk kind of guy. I'm not necessarily sure that outside of Warrnambool he has enough widespread support and appeal to this kind of voter to actually take the seat, but definitely one to watch on election night. So moving on to Corangamite. Once upon a time, this was very much a rural seat that had a little bit of Geelong's southern suburbs in it, but now, because of population growth on the Bellarine, the Surf Coast, and in Geelong's southern suburbs with a lot of new development around Armstrong Creek and Charlemont, this has very much become a suburban seat, with a little bit of kind of tree sea change appeal as well, with Torquay and towns like Port Arlington and Queenscliff. Having said that, though, it is a mortgage-built area with all the new building going on, and a lot of young families moving in, buying their first homes in suburbs like Warm Ponds, Charlemont, Armstrong Creek. So the increases in interest rates will have been felt probably a little bit more disproportionately by voters here, but at the same time, not only at the federal level, but at the overlapping state level, there's been sharp trends towards the Labor Party. Just the demographic that has been brought in is very friendly to them. Seats like Polwarth and South Barwon have trended quite sharply to Labor, despite the other factors at play. So a really tough one for the Liberals to flip, particularly on that margin. And I think Libby Coke has sort of really defined herself as a strong local member too. So the McEwen, this is probably the most interesting sort of Liberal Labor marginal that we'll cover today. It's a very sort of varied electorate, but overall it's trending towards the Liberals. It swung 2% to the Liberals in a low tide year, not only nationally but in Victoria. The incumbent Labor MP Rob Mitchell, he's thought to have quite a strong personal vote. He was able to survive the 2013 Abbott election win, but there's just so many different things going on in this electorate. You've got that urban fringe in Melbourne's north that's seems to be trending a little bit more to the Liberals, but at the same time, you've got growth areas around the Macedon Ranges and in towns like Gisborne that, similar to what we mentioned in Corangamite, that's bringing in a demographic that's perhaps a little bit more friendly to Labor. So different shifts across the electorate, but overall it seems to be trending to the Liberals. And with the boundaries changing and new people moving in, that might impact that personal vote that Rob Mitchell has. Voters might not necessarily feel as close to him as they did perhaps in previous cycles. Moving on to Nichols. This is quite a large rural seat based around Shepparton and the agricultural districts along the Murray River, but in recent years it's also moved quite a long way south to take in just a little bit of that urban fringe in the Kilmore area of northern Melbourne. It was an open seat in 2022 after many years of being a really strong coalition seat that had swapped between the Liberals and the Nationals. The Nationals were able to win despite the independent Rob Priestley polling at about a quarter of the vote and receiving quite a strong preference flow. But since then, the Nationals seem to have gained some strength in the Shepparton area, and not only that, but the local Voices for Nichols group haven't actually endorsed a candidate, which would suggest that it won't be the same one who ran last time. They'll have to build a new brand around him or her, I should say. And Sam Birrell is going to have the advantage of incumbency too, without a Liberal challenger. So seems to me that it would be a monumental challenge for an independent to take this seat, despite how well they did last time. So moving on to Casey. Now that Tony Smith, former Speaker of the House, has retired, this seat has become very marginal. Once again, a few different aspects to this electorate. The Liberals are quite strong in the Upper Yarra and in those outer northeastern suburbs around Lilydale, whereas when you go up into the Yarra Valley proper, and especially down into the Dandenong Ranges, the Labor and Green vote becomes a lot stronger. Right-wing minor parties had a fairly strong showing last time round, and there's also this TL-like independent who's planning on running again and will most likely improve her primary vote. To me, it sounds like quite a crowded field. I think the Liberals probably have enough natural strength to hang on, but some recent MRP polling has shown it to be very competitive as well. So definitely one to watch, and absolutely a target seat for Labor, one of their rare target seats. And finally, over in Monash, this is sort of south and west Gippsland, the Bass Coast, and just picking up a little bit of that sort of growth area around sort of Warragul Druin. Mostly been a pretty reliable Liberal seat since the end of the Howard years, held by Russell Broadbent, but he's now lost pre-selection, and he is going to stand again as an independent. Deb Leonard, a more sort of centrist left-wing independent, is looking to run again as well. So another sort of crowded field, and the Bass Coast area is trending away from the LNP just a little bit at the state level as well. So it's not going to be a simple matter of holding this electorate for the Liberals, particularly with having lost incumbency. But again, very crowded field, which probably suits them. Anyone who's watched the previous videos in the series on Victoria will be familiar with this, but the polling aggregators are showing currently quite a substantial swing to the coalition in Victoria, which puts half a dozen seats in play, and it's supported by a couple of different data points. So we'll have a quick look at the MRP polling. Nothing particularly outstanding or surprising here. In Wannon, the second reading showed a very competitive race, but the other two, including the most recent one, seemed to give Dan Tehan the edge there. Corangamite has tightened considerably. The last reading was actually a dead heat, but the ALP have had a very firm advantage in the other two. McEwen is looking like a toss-up. The last two readings have been too close to call, and you can see both times the LNP primary has climbed above that of Labor's. So that one looks really close. It's if the Liberal vote indeed does cross 40%, I do think it's going to be very hard for Labor to chase them down. In Nichols, it's showing a closer race than I would expect. A very low Greens vote there, but yeah, the Liberals or the Nationals in this case, unable to really crack that mid-40s, which is always going to keep the margin pretty tight. Then we head over to Casey, which the first reading had the coalition holding, but the last two were very, very competitive. So whereas in a lot of other seats, Labor's margin has dropped off a cliff from the second to the third reading. In this case, it didn't happen. So whether or not that really reflects what's happening locally, or if that's just a reflection of what was found in terms of the demographic data nationwide, I guess we'll find out on election night, but it does still give the Liberals the slight edge. And then over in Monash, fairly tight, but then that Liberal vote climbing quite dramatically from 34 to 39 all the way up to 44. And if they're winning 44% in a crowded field, including Russell Broadbent himself, there's no way they're losing that seat. So then on to my predictions. Wannon, I think, will be a Liberal retain, and I think he'll actually increase the margin slightly owing to a more favourable preference flow. I just don't think that outside of Warrnambool that Alex Dyson has the strength and the broad appeal that he would need to actually peel away enough Liberal voters. I think the Liberal vote will be quite sticky, and if anything, the swing might be on towards them in those more working class strongholds such as Portland and Ararat. I don't see that vote necessarily shifting to Dyson. In Corangamite, I have the ALP holding that seat relatively comfortably with a small swing against, but the trends are just not friendly to the Liberals there. There'll be a slight swing being a mortgage belt area and being likely a strong statewide swing towards them, but there's no way they're taking back that seat on current margin. McEwen I have as a Liberal gain. I think it's the type of seat that really suits Dutton and his campaign, and I think it's enough with the statewide and the national mood. I think there'll be enough there to overcome any personal vote that the local incumbent has. Nichols I have as quite an easy Nationals retain, even though that seat is moving down towards metropolitan Melbourne. It's if the local independence movement hasn't found a candidate yet, I don't think they're going to have time to really set up the sort of name recognition and brand around them that they would need to overcome the Nationals here. Easy retain. Casey I have as a very marginal Liberal retain. It might even be closer than that. I just think that in an election cycle where cost of living and the economy is going to be the main issue, perhaps the weakness of the Liberals on social issues in different parts of this electorate probably won't be exposed this cycle, but it's definitely one to watch in future cycles. Pardon me. And finally, in Monash, this will be a Liberal retain. Well, technically it's a gain off the independent because Russell Broadbent sits on the crossbench currently, but I think they'll retain quite easily and increase their margin from 2022, especially with a crowded field. I just don't think there'll be preference. I think Labor will finish in the two-party preferred ahead of the independents, and I don't think there'll be enough preference discipline between those independents and Labor to make the seat competitive. And for those that are interested and have been following the channel, I just wanted to give an update on what the current sort of seat count is based on my predictions. So far, with New South Wales and Queensland yet to be covered, we're looking at a total of 9 seats flipping to the Liberals, which brings their total up to 64. That includes one of the Teals and Monash flipping from the sitting independent back to the Liberals, who originally won it in 2022. So that brings them to 64 seats, and Labor, I've got them losing 7, which takes them down to 71. So we're very much firmly in minority government territory, and the crossbench minus the Greens is currently at 10. So clearly New South Wales is going to decide where I think we're going to end up, and I do think it's going to be quite decisive. That's it for today. Thank you so much to everyone who's been watching the videos. The channel's starting to really grow in recent days. Thank you to everyone that's subscribed. Please, if you like the content, do give the videos a like. Do comment your thoughts below, and definitely hit that subscribe button so you see all my updates. I'm planning on completing this series quite soon, so that we can have a full prediction and a full preview of the federal election coming into the new year. And I'd just love more conversations to be happening in the comments. And just thanks again for supporting the channel as you guys have been doing. So cheers, and I will see you in the next video where we're going to have a look into Queensland. Bye for now.